Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to Brendan and ICOP for this opportunity to give a presentation at the ICOP Symposium. I want to tell you about the systematic implementation of patient and public involvement, PPI, at the University of Gothenburg Center for Person-Centered Care, GPCC. But before we delve into that, I thought I should tell you a little bit, at least, about my own lived experience and advocacy work. So, I had quite a normal life with just a little bit of asthma and allergies. However, I did grow up with a disabled sister, and I'm not showing her picture here because I want to protect her privacy. And also, my family in Germany has had to deal with several other severe diseases. So we have a variety of patient and care perspectives in our family as well. But I'm sure many of you have that, and it's probably nothing unusual. So I think what in the end then turned me into a patient advocate and representative is that I became seriously ill myself. And that happened just half a year after we had moved from Germany to Sweden with our two small kids. And there was just this one day where I experienced numbness in my left arm and hand. I could not lift the glass. I had balance issues. I had problems walking, and I had to just seek care in an emergency room on a Sunday morning. So I spent 4 days in the hospital, and the doctors could see on the CT and MRI that there was some sort of lesion in my brain, but they didn't know if it was a tumor or an infection. So I got discharged without a diagnosis and spent most of my time at home waiting. And when I finally got my diagnosis, cavernoma, I got it written on a post-it note, and the neurosurgeon told me specifically not to Google. And I remember coming out of this meeting just being so disappointed that I wasn't told anything specific. So, of course, I had to Google, and also my GP had to Google. So, for those of you who don't know, cavernoma is a blood vessel malformation with leaky walls, and it's very rare that they rupture and cause serious symptoms, like in my case. They look a bit like a raspberry, and this here is a professional drawing by Peter Lawrence. So, yeah, I mean, in general, I um, felt like I was falling between the chairs, and there was so little coordination and communication. Some of the doctor's visits were actually quite unnecessary. So those costs, I think, could really have been saved. Um, and what frustrated me also so much was that it took until August until I finally got to see a rehab team, and they could finally really help me with my symptoms and give me a better understanding of what I was going through. So yeah, but otherwise, I just found that I got more information in the online patient communities, especially in the UK and especially in the US, because they were really driving research forward there. So I got so inspired that together with some other patients, we started creating a patient organization in Sweden for cavernoma, and we found other national patient organizations within Europe and started forming a European Cavernoma Alliance, because this is such a rare condition that cavernomas rupture, that we just had to work more on European and international level. And through these organizations now we can work more professionally with researchers, and we're involved in proposal writing processes mostly to get funding for more research. And here's a picture where we did get funding for a feasibility study for an international platform trial. But we also, for example, go to conferences, show patient stories to get researchers inspired and more of an understanding of what we go through as patients. And I mean, my patient advocacy journey does continue in my free time now. I've been doing so many patient expert trainings from your party and also Eurotis, the European Umbrella Organization for Rare Diseases, that I thought I could use this experience to find a new job. And I found a job as a project assistant at GPCC in August 2021. And I started with 50%, but then I've been gradually increasing my hours. So let me tell you a bit more about GPCC. I do assume that most of you know about our National and Interdisciplinary Research Center that was formed in 2010. We do have a variety of research projects and host conferences, and I also hope that you are all coming to the global conference that we're hosting again next year. And I also hope that you're familiar with the GPCC model for person-centered care. If not, I will come back to it in this presentation here as well. But some of my colleagues probably have already been talking about it, and I just assume this audience is also quite familiar with the GPCC model. So yeah, but what I wanted to highlight also is that GPCC was involved in initiating and leading the work with the European standard on patient involvement as a minimum requirement for person-centered care. So here's a QR code that you can scan and learn more. And I think we will be sharing the slides as well. So if you don't catch it now, you will catch it then. GPCC has a patient and care advisory board, which we like to call the Person Council. It was established in 2016, and everyone who's part of this Person Council has lived experience as a patient or informal carer, and everyone is involved in a variety of advocacy work in healthcare and research settings. So the task for the Person Council is to have a continuous dialogue and consultation with GPCC steering group. And also research groups can visit the Person Council to get feedback on their work. Many of the Person Council members are also involved in various projects and activities, like in writing books, info materials, review of proposals, educational activities, seminars, debate articles, and so on. So this Person Council already existed when I came to GPCC. So when I joined GPCC, I started as a project assistant for this mapping review, where we wanted to better understand how PPI is being implemented in healthcare settings. And through this work, I also got very interested in exploring frameworks for PPI. And there are not just a few frameworks, there are hundreds of frameworks, and they depend heavily on the context and setting where PPI is happening. So while I was looking through these frameworks, and also through these articles, I realized that there are actually quite a lot of similar barriers when it comes to PPI in both in healthcare and in research. So when I then was tasked to start leading a strategic focus area at GPCC, which is called the development of partnerships between patient representatives, the general public, and healthcare organizations and decision-making systems, that's when I thought it was also time to reflect a bit more on how we can foster PPI within GPCC a bit more. So I did a survey with the project leaders to find out how they're working with PPI. And that survey I did in June 2023. So our research projects typically follow, not all of them, but many of them typically follow this research cycle where you start with identifying and prioritizing issues and research questions, develop a research proposal, undertake the research, analyze the results, prepare the manuscript, and then disseminate the findings. And sometimes it also goes into implementation then, of course. So 20 projects responded to the survey that I did, and they provided me with some data in which of these phases they have they're involving patients. So I was glad to see that 16 of the 20 projects that had PPI were already involving patients when they were refining research questions. But I also know that it's important to involve patients early on so that you identify and prioritize the research questions that are most relevant to patients and society at large. So what I would like to see in the next couple of years is that we also improve here in the very beginning. So we have much earlier involvement. So there's room for improvement. I was expecting to see that fewer projects involve patients and carers in the manuscript preparation. So this dip here was quite expected. But I would also like to see a bit more involvement when it comes to the dissemination of results. So yeah, I think some room for improvement, but still quite a good start for this work, I think. We can also look at the different levels of involvement. So if we are thinking of this in some form of a ladder, maybe you know Einstein's ladder, so consultation is on a lower step. Dialogue and involvement is a higher step, and partnership would be the best if you want to frame it that way. But we also find that for some projects, it might just be feasible to have consultation or a dialogue, and maybe it would also be too demanding for patients to be involved in every step of the way. So the 20 projects that I surveyed were giving me quite decent, how can I say, result. I mean, I was impressed that there were so many projects that were working really in partnership with patients, but I'm also happy about just having dialogue and involvement in so many projects. And for those projects where there's consultation, it might just be that it's just more feasible to do it like that. So yeah, this survey was just to get a first understanding. But I was also asking the project leaders what challenges they were having with the implementation of patient and public involvement. And there are quite a lot of challenges. So what I want you to take away from this slide is that PPI is not easy. But I also want to start approaching these challenges in a more systematic way. So administrative difficulties with financial compensation should be relatively easy to fix, right? The fact that it's difficult to find patient representatives or problems with the recruitment process, it's something worth to look into. Also, the difficulty of keeping patient representatives engaged. I think there are things we can do about that. Also, there are tools to help with the definition of a patient representative's role in relation to the purpose of the project. Time constraints is something we can't do much about at this point, I'm afraid. Knowledge level and language terminology, I think there we have to come together and work from both sides. Researchers need to learn how to speak more in lay language and use less abbreviations when they talk to patient representatives, but also patient representatives can learn and start learning the language that researchers speak. So if we just educate them, right? Representative is a difficult issue to address that requires a whole presentation on that in itself, because it's such a huge topic to discuss. Culture and power imbalance, of course, is a real issue. Researchers do have the initiator power, which is something that also then leads to later involvement. PPI with children and young adults, there are some projects within our center where they're starting to involve children and young adults. So that's quite a new field also for PPI. But how did we start overcoming these challenges? In January this year, we launched a policy for financial compensation. And this is work that we've been doing with our HR administration team at the university. And this policy also includes some guidance for how to recruit and how to specify roles. It gives GPCC researchers also the opportunity to request additional funds for PPI. And what we also provide is a drop-in time that happens twice a month to offer some support for researchers and patient care representatives. So this policy is a bit more than just a compensation policy. It also tries to address some of the other issues and challenges we saw. So our recommendation is actually to involve at least 2 patient care representatives who have also strong connections to their community. So when there are questions within the research group, that the patient or care representative can go to the community and come back with an answer that really reflects the answers in the community well. But we also recommend to reflect together on the role of the patient representatives throughout the projects. So for specifying the role, there is this tool called the involvement matrix, which you can find also through this link. We have adapted it just a little bit for this example that we like to give to our researchers so they can help this, they can use this as a guidance on how one could do it. So depending on the research questions and on the design of the study, one could you just use these different levels of involvement for each step in the research cycle. And then the patients could have sometimes more of a leading role, sometimes more of a role where they just get information and listen and maybe just give advice and views when they're requested. So we think this is quite a nice tool to use for PPI in research. So our compensation policy and or our PPI policy is now addressing some of these challenges that the project leaders reported. So yeah, administrative difficulties with financial compensation problems with recruitment, and difficult to define the patient representative's role. So those I can sort of start to mark green now in my strategy. We wanted to also look a bit more into how we can keep patient representatives more engaged. And for that, we've been starting to work with the Person Council using a tool called an impact log. There are different varieties out there in the literature that are getting more and more difficult, but we wanted to use a very, very simple version. So basically what you do when you're writing the minutes for a meeting, you do sort of mark the points that have been, the main points that have been raised in the meeting. And so it's documented in a table. And then after some time, you follow up with either the steering group or the project groups. What has this advice that the Person Council gave actually led to? And also document if it hasn't led to anything, so that we at least can say, well, the Person Council made a difference in so many issues, and that will also give us a bit of an idea how much of an impact the Person Council has. And what we also think is important is to communicate back what we find out through the impact log to the Person Council, so that we show them that they are making a difference. And I think this communication, this feedback loop back showing what difference patients have been making is also helping them to stay engaged. So in a way, this is also a documentation, which reminds us of the third step or third cornerstone in the GPCC model to safeguard the partnership, right? So if we now take a look at the GPCC model, it's active listening and narrative elicitation, initiating the partnership, then shared decision-making and co-creation of a plan, implementing the partnership, and also documentation and continuity for safeguarding the partnership. So these three cornerstones that this figure you might have seen in the papers that have been published from our researchers. So now if we take this model and develop it further, we could also say that we could make patient and public involvement person-centered that way. If we follow these three steps and then repeat them, right? So let's say you have a patient advisory board, or you have two patient representatives that are working with you in your research group. The first step is to listen and to really understand the narrative as an initiating of the partnership. Then when you're implementing the partnership, in the GPCC model, this has been described as shared decision-making, but maybe that's not always possible. So if we now take a ladder that is relational, you come from two sides, and then you choose which step on the ladder you're going to be working on, depending on where in the research cycle or where in the project you are. So this way, if you're rather informing each other, you're consulting each other, involving each other, making transparent decisions, if possible, shared decisions together with each other, but also delegate power to each other. This is how you establish trust. And if you document that in an impact log, which you follow up on and communicate back, this is how you create and safeguard the partnership also in patient and public involvement. So this model is what we've started to communicate to the researchers in our center, and we also have a paper in preparation for this. But yeah, if we want to put it now into the bigger picture, all of this, the Helsinki Declaration has been recently updated. I don't know if you knew about this, but in the declaration, subjects, the word subject has been replaced with participant. And they also added a paragraph on meaningful engagement with potential and enrolled participants in their communities, that it should occur before, during, and following medical research. So this update of the Helsinki Declaration, but previously even already the AMATA, but also recently the WHO Resolution on Social Participation, and this increased